In some of the Lambda expressions I've used so far, I've written an operation or expression. In others, I've simply referenced other name methods like system.out.println, for example. Java gives us an alternative syntax to use for this second kind of Lambda that uses named methods. These are called method references. These provide a more compact, easier to read Lambda expression for methods that are already defined on a class. For the last couple of videos, I've been ignoring IntelliJ's warnings and hints whenever I've used system.out.println in a Lambda expression. IntelliJ is issuing the warnings because they can be replaced with a method reference. I've started with a new project called Method References for this video. I'll set up a simple list of names, so list, type string, named list, equals a new array list, and I'll pass a list of strings with values Anna, Bob, Chuck, and Dave. And as you've seen many times, I'll execute the for each method on list and pass the Lambda expression that uses system.out.println. You've probably noticed IntelliJ's been highlighting this Lambda expression each time I've used it. If I hover over that, it says Lambda can be replaced with a method reference, so I'll do that. That replaces the code with a different kind of expression. This is probably going to be the most commonly used method reference you'll see. At first glance, it's not really obvious why a method reference has this syntax. A method reference abstracts the Lambda expression even further, eliminating the need to declare formal parameters. We also don't have to pass arguments to the method in question, in this case, println. A method reference has double colons between the qualifying type and the method name. In this example of a consumer interface, not only is the method inferred, but the parameters are as well. Does this mean you can use any method in method references? Methods which can be used as method references are based on the context of the Lambda expression. This means the method reference is again dependent on the targeted interface's method. You can reference a static method on a class. You can reference an instance method from either an instance external to the expression or an instance passed as one of the arguments, which I'll explain shortly. Or you can reference a constructor by using new as the method. I'll look at each of these in turn. Method references can be used to increase the readability of your code. The system.out.println method reference is an example of an instance method called on an external instance. The instance is the print stream object that gets returned from the system.out method. I'm going to add a method similar to the one I included in the Lambda expressions videos called calculator. I'll make it private and static and generic with a type T. It won't have a return type, so void, and I'm going to call it calculator with the first parameter being a binary operator and two additional parameters, value 1 and value 2, both of type T. Inside this method, I'll call the binary operator's functional method, apply on function, and this method will print the result instead of returning it. In the main method, I'll set up a call to that method using a Lambda expression, which I also used previously, that has two parameters, a and b, that returns a plus b, and the arguments I'll pass to that method are 10 and 25. Again, IntelliJ has highlighted part of this Lambda expression. Hovering over that, you can see it still says I can replace this with a method reference, so I'll do that. That gets replaced with the method reference integer : sum. I don't think I talked about the sum method, but it's a static method on the integer wrapper class that returns the sum of two integers, which obviously replaces the plus operator when the operands are integers. You may or may not agree that this code is a little simpler to read compared to the Lambda expression itself. This is the second type of method reference that uses a static method on a class with the class type as the reference on the left. Let's try that same exercise with decimal numbers. First, I'll call calculator with the same Lambda expression, but pass some decimal values instead, 2.5 and 7.5. IntelliJ is again prompting me to turn this into a method reference, so I will. You can see it's using the static method on double this time, and this produces 10.0 from the calculation. Before I look at the second type of instance method reference, which can be a little confusing, I want to talk about using a method reference to instantiate a new instance of a class. I'll create a class above main called plain old. I'll create a public constructor for this. I'll add some text to show when the constructor is called. I now want to add a private static int variable called lastID that will keep track of the last ID. I'll initialize that to 1. I need an int field called ID also. I'll set that field in the constructor, assigning the last ID to ID and incrementing the last ID with a post increment operator. I'll also add ID to the statement that gets printed there. Remember, there's only one copy of last ID shared by all instances, so this code that increments it is incrementing the shared value. In the main code, I want to create a local variable. Its type will be a supplier. Hopefully, you'll remember this is a functional interface that has the functional method get that takes no arguments but returns an instance. I've set this up using a lambda expression that returns a new instance of the plain old class. As mentioned, my variable is a supplier, and I've used plain old as a type argument. I've assigned it a lambda expression with no arguments, which means I need to use the empty parentheses there. With the expression itself to the right of the arrow, this just calls new with the class name and empty parentheses. We know this calls the empty constructor and returns a new instance of the plain old object. Yet again, IntelliJ is indicating that I can improve the code, mentioning it can be replaced with a method reference, so I'll do that. This method reference is a special type, a constructor method reference. If I run this code like this, which I'll do now, nothing happens though. I didn't see my constructor executed or see a statement that a plain old object was created. Why not? Well, a method reference, like lambda expression variables, is more like a method declaration. It's created and then used at a later time. It's not immediately executed at the time it's declared, it's deferred, and the code snippet gets passed around. When you create variables that are lambda expressions or method references, it's important to remember that the code isn't invoked at that point. The statement or code block gets invoked at the point in the code that the targeted functional method is called. How can I execute this method reference then? Well, I could simply execute the get method on the variable. I'll set up another plain old variable named newPojo and assign it to reference1.get. If I run that now, we should see something happen. And you can see that the constructor was executed. So why would you ever do this? Isn't it just simpler to call new on the plain old class as we would any new instance? Yes, in this case it would be. Later though, you'll learn methods for creating a lot of instances at once, and this way of doing things will make more sense. For now, I'll set up my own method that does a little bit of that to give you an idea of what I'm talking about. I'll make this private static and it'll return an array of plain old instances. I'll call it seed array, and the parameters will be a supplier called reference and an int called count. I'll set up an array variable in this method and assign it new plain old with the count in brackets. I'll call arrays.setAll, passing it my array and a lambda expression where I is the parameter. Instead of doing anything with I in the lambda, I will just call reference.get. I'll then return the array from this method. This code will assign every element in the array, whatever is the result of executing get, for the lambda expression passed to this method. We've said this is going to be a plain old class by making the array that type. Let me execute this from the main method, using my method reference as the supplier variable. First, I'll print out a descriptive statement, getting array, and then I'll assign another local variable, Pojo1, an array of plain old instances. I'll assign that to the result of a call to this new method. I'll use a method reference as the first argument and the number 10 as the second argument. Let's see what that produces when I run it. You can see I've created 10 of these objects and placed them in an array. I'll be revisiting suppliers and additional use cases for using them when we get to the streams section of the course. In this video, I've covered using method references, for instance methods, static methods, as well as constructors. There's one more method reference type to cover, and I'll do that in the next video.